Now we want to talk about the rehearsal process. And this is something that I really enjoy because everyone is always very nervous putting together an intervention. But in my experience, after you go through your rehearsal process, you're going to feel very good about the intervention. You're going to have a lot of confidence and your team will really be unified. And we're going to take you through a whole process now of how to do your rehearsal, and we're going to vary it for different kinds of interventions as well.
The very first thing you want to do is take out your checklist and go through everything. Has everything been completed? You don't want any bumps in the road during this process. You want everything to happen as smoothly as possible to make it as easy for the alcoholic or addict to say yes. And secondly, you want to reconfirm with the treatment center. You want to make sure that they have all the information they need from you, that indeed the bed is available for you, and that all the financial arrangements have been made. So pick up the phone once again and just ask them, is there anything else you need before we bring our alcoholic or addict into treatment?
Now we want to take you through the rehearsal process. There are 4 main elements to the rehearsal process, and we'll go through them one at a time. The first element in the rehearsal process is just to read your intervention letters out loud. Of course, everyone will have written their intervention letters, and I want you to all sit down as a group and read the letters out loud. You haven't set the order of the letters yet, but I want everyone to hear what everyone else has to say. And then after you read the letters, you will work as a group to edit them. You want to take out any trace of blame or anger or anything like that so that you really have a good, tight letter. You know, I really enjoy this part of the rehearsal process. I find that it really unifies the team and brings everyone together. It's only natural that people are going to be nervous and anxious in the run-up to the intervention, especially when you get very close to it. But I find that reading the letters out loud as a group and working on them together builds a sense of confidence. And I think you'll find that when you finish this part of the rehearsal, you'll feel much more confident about the outcome.
And then next, you're going to decide what order you're going to read your letters in. Now, this is more art than science. First of all, as you listen to all the letters, you're going to get kind of a feel for them and what the content is and the emotional value of them. And what we usually say is start really strong and end really strong. And here's a little tip. The first letter that's read should be by somebody who the alcoholic or addict really respects. This might be a favorite uncle, a grandmother, a coach, somebody that the alcoholic is going to sit and listen to and is not going to stand up and walk out on.
And they should also be somebody who really has the facts.
And has the facts, absolutely, knows what's been going on, has been seeing it. Then the last intervention letter should be very strong too, emotionally. This is somebody the alcoholic really loves. They can really tug on the heartstrings, and this is somebody the alcoholic's going to have a very difficult time saying no to. It might be their mother. You know, they may have such a close relationship with the mother, love her so dearly that when she asks, will you accept the help that we're offering you today, the alcoholic is going to say yes.
On a different note, if there's someone in the group who we know touches off the anger of the addict, and often, as unfair as this may be, it may be the spouse who's kind of got a contentious relationship right now, we want to put that person kind of in the middle of the group, almost hide them in it to an extent, and it's probably a good idea if their letter is a little shorter than the others.
That's right, and maybe sandwich them between 2 people that the alcoholic has a lot of respect for so that you downplay the anger in that relationship. And also, after you decide, then everybody should know what order the letters are going in. So if Uncle Joe is first, he knows he's first, the next person knows they're number 2, number 3, they know who they follow, so that on intervention day, there's a natural flow from one letter to the next.
Next, we want to talk about setting the seating arrangements for the intervention. Now, just about every intervention is going to take place in a family room or a living room, and just about every family room or living room has a couch in it. And we want the alcoholic or addict to sit right in the middle of that couch. And typically, the couch will hold 3 people, so you'll want letter number 1 on one side, letter number 3, or not letter number 3, the last letter on the other side, so that they're bookends for the subject of the intervention. Now, typically, we're going to want the chairperson to sit directly across from the subject of the intervention so that they can make good eye contact and keep control of the entire situation. If there is a person who is problematic in the intervention team, and by that I mean the person who may have some emotional firecrackers going on, a lot of times that's going to be the spouse who the addict blames for everything in the whole world. We'll want that person to sit off to the side so that it's a little bit more difficult for the addict to make direct eye contact with them. Other than that, everyone will sit around in as tight a circle as is possible. Sometimes when the intervention is beginning, a little bit of furniture needs to be arranged, or maybe an extra chair has to be brought in from the dining room. But we want things to happen pretty rapidly and get everyone seated as quickly as possible on intervention day.
But as much as you can make the living room furniture in a bit of a circle, the better, so that everybody is kind of included in the intervention process. And another tip we want to say is sometimes people think, well, maybe we'll do this around the dining room table. And we would advise that you not use a table, because actually having that table between you and the alcoholic actually is a barrier to your emotional responses. So stay away from tables and do it in the living room. And when you're doing the rehearsal, you want to do everything just the way you're going to do it on intervention day. So what do I mean by that? We don't want anything that's going to act as an interruption. So we don't want people smoking, for instance.
Turn off your phone ringers, put the animals in another room, don't have any snacks or food around.
No snacks, and we don't want to have any talking. We don't want people getting up while people are reading their letters. Everyone sits quietly and attentively as each letter is being read.
So that's really it. When you do the rehearsal, do it like it's the real McCoy and go through it step by step.
And if you're going through the process and you get very emotional, again, you can stop reading your letter, breathe. When you feel better, start reading again. Tears are never a problem during an intervention.
That's right. We like tears. Next, I want to talk about how you would walk through the rehearsal if it's going to be a situation where the alcoholic comes to the home or location where the intervention is taking place. So they're actually coming to the door, and the door is going to be answered by the chairperson, but really everybody is going to be there because we want to have a very, very warm welcome. We want a great feeling of love and concern, no matter what the other person, what the alcoholic's reaction is. We want everyone to greet them very warmly, and then as quickly as possible, we're going to bring them in and bring them into the seating arrangement. In almost every case, that means they're going to be seated on the couch with the first and last letter on either side of them. And then the chairperson is going to make some kind of an opening statement to get the ball rolling. But as you can see from what I'm saying, this is something that's going to happen relatively quickly. We want the person to come in the door, and then we want to get down to business. And so the chairperson is going to say something usually along the lines of, John, you know how much we all love you and care about you, but there's something that we want to talk about today, and we've actually taken the time to write down everything that we want to say in the form of letters, and we really just want you to hear what we have to say. And then the chairperson will look to the person who's going to read the first letter and say something like, well, Mary, why don't you begin?
And let me just give you a couple tips about reading your letters. We've already talked about crying, that it's perfectly all right. If you begin to cry, again, you can just breathe, pause, and start reading your letter again. Another thing that happens is people sometimes, because they're nervous, they start reading their letter very, very quickly. And so they lose the emotional impact of the letter. So you've practiced your letter, and if you know that you tend to read it very quickly, we'd like you to slow down so that it's a very natural tempo.
A natural tempo, but not too slow. People will also make the reverse mistake of talking too slowly, trying to make a point, and then of course the mind starts to wander, and people really don't hear what you're trying to say so carefully.
So keep it as natural as you possibly can. Another thing is to speak loud enough so that the alcoholic or addict can hear you. If you're speaking very quietly, and especially if you're far away from them, they may miss much of what you're saying. And that's a real consideration too if you're intervening on an older adult who might have a hearing problem.
And you want to make sure that you move pretty automatically from one letter to the next. There shouldn't be any real time in between. You don't want any discussions to start up. You just want to have one beat in between each letter and keep the process moving along.
That's right, because the chairperson's they're gonna introduce the first letter. Like they might say, Joe, your sister's gonna be reading her letter to you first. But that's the last letter the chairperson is going to introduce, because you know what order each letter is in. Everybody knows who they come after. So what I usually say to people is when one person finishes their letter, just count in their head, 1, 2, and then begin their letter.
That's right. And then the last letter is the closer. This is the person who's going to conclude the letters, and they should do one more thing besides reading their letter. When they are done, when the last person is done reading their letter, they should set it down. Of course, they're sitting right next to the alcoholic or addict. They should turn to them, make eye contact, maybe make physical contact with them, put their hands on them because, of course, they feel a great deal of love and concern. And then they are going to ask them something very specific. They're going to say something like, Joe, will you go with us to the treatment center today to get the help that you need? And then no one should say a word. The next word should come from Joe. And if you're very lucky, you may get an immediate yes without any objections.
And that happens more often than you might imagine. And sometimes the toughest alcoholics and addicts, people say they'll never go to treatment, will just say, okay, where do you want me to go? But there are other times when you don't get an immediate yes, and what you get instead are the objections.
And there's no problem with that. That's probably going to happen 60 or 70% of the time. And of course, why wouldn't a person have some objections or at least some questions that they need to have answered? So we go directly then to the objections, let them ask their questions, let them make their objections, and then we'll just answer them very carefully one at a time.
And of course, we've already prepared for all the objections. We've brainstormed. We really know what they're going to ask. It's very unusual that there are any surprises. So you're prepared for that. And I always think of as objections are really great because the alcoholic is looking for more information, and it also gives us an opportunity to know what they need to help them move forward.
So during your rehearsal, you're going to be thinking about this, and you will also, after you've gone through the letters and gone through your rehearsal, you should also, each person in turn, read your bottom lines out loud, and again use that group process to edit the bottom lines to make sure that everyone is appropriate and everyone has all the elements that you want it to have. So take your time to go through that, and you may also think a little bit about whether some bottom lines need to be softened or whether they need to be strengthened.
And we've already talked about this when we discuss bottom lines and how to write your bottom lines, but it's worth repeating right now. We only go to bottom lines if we cannot move the person to yes. So in other words, we have gone through all their objections, we've answered their objections, we've taken the time to sort of wear them down, and they still say no. Only then are we going to move into those bottom lines. And that's really going to be the call of the chairperson. They're going to get a feeling, you know, that we really can't go much further than this. Why don't we move into bottom lines? And they're going to the chairperson will introduce the bottom lines just as they introduced the letter. So you'll read your bottom line in the same order that you read your letters.
But in most cases, you'll never even get to the bottom lines.
That's right.
But you always want to be prepared. Things are just a little bit different if the intervention is taking place at the alcoholic's home. In that case, of course, the whole intervention team will be traveling there to the home, and you will want to decide in advance, of course, how you're going to sit, just like the last time. Of course, people will have been to that home before, and so we know what the seating is. And it makes sense to really make a little diagram of the living room or family room or wherever the intervention is taking place and deciding in advance who's going to sit where. And once again, if an extra chair needs to be brought in from the dining room, that's no problem. That should just happen very quickly as people are being seated.
And because everyone's driving, everybody wants to arrive at the alcoholic's house together, it's always a good idea to pick a nearby landmark. It's great if there's a church maybe a half a mile away. Everyone can meet at the church parking lot and get there about 30 minutes ahead of time. So if anybody encounters traffic or slow down, that you have plenty of time for everybody to gather.
And you might even want to go down, if you came in 7 different vehicles, maybe you'll go down to 3 different vehicles so you don't have such a long caravan going to the house.
That's right. You can kind of carpool and get in a few cars and all drive over to the house together, again, because you all need to arrive together.
And there are some times when you may have one person go over to the house first, just to make sure that the person is up and dressed and showered or whatever. And in that case, they may be making a call to the team and saying, okay, it's okay to come over now, or it's not okay. And of course, they would just step into the bathroom or something like that to make that quick cell phone call.
Or the same thing can happen if somebody's living with the alcoholic. For instance, the alcoholic's wife is there and the team is in the church parking lot, and she might call on the phone and say, you know, he just got in the shower, wait, don't come over yet, I'll call you when the time is right, so that you can get a sense of timing, know the person's up, know they're dressed, and then everybody drives over together and they all go to the front door together.
And again, it's that really warm greeting. The person will probably know within 1 nanosecond that it's an intervention, but I want everybody to be very warm and very up. We don't want people going in there with, you know, kind of dour looks on their face like this is very heavy, because the truth is that there's a big problem here, but we have an even bigger solution. So we as an intervention team are feeling very up and very positive, and we want to communicate that coming in the door.
And you may feel anxiety. That is so natural, but if you can just go to that place of love and you can express that love, that's great. So when you walk in, for instance, at this point, everybody knows where they're going to sit because you made the seating chart. And perhaps the alcoholic's in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee. Well, the chairman can just walk in and go, hey, Joe, we're all here, and why don't you come on in? You know, easy does it, very relaxed. Why don't you come on in and join us? And you know what? People are really polite and really nice, and almost all people will do that. It's very, very rare when they'll hesitate. Usually they come right on in, and they're curious too. Why is everybody here?
Yes, and I'll tell you, a lot of families worry about, oh, there's going to be this big angry outburst and a lot of things are going to happen, but that very, very rarely happens. And the reason is, you know, if 1 or 2 people walked in, you might get that anger and that resentment. But when 8 or 10 people, and really important people, walk in, it tends to moderate the person's behavior, so you can relax a little bit. Things probably aren't going to be as difficult as you think they might be.
And you know, when the chairman walks the alcoholic into the living room and says, hey, why don't you just take a seat here next to your mom, and I'm going to sit with you too, the alcoholic is, in almost all cases, going to do that.
So going back to the rehearsal for the intervention, this is going to be the time too when you have last-minute questions that you're going to work out as a group, last-minute details that you need to take care of. And if there's someone who can't come to the rehearsal, you know, a lot of times we really don't feel too good about that. We want people to be at the rehearsal if they're going to be at the intervention. It takes a commitment to be there and to be part of this process, and we really want the whole team to work through this together. There may be rare exceptions to that, but they are rare.
And if there is an exception, and again, what Jeff is saying, I just want to underline it, we want everybody prepared, because if one person isn't prepared, you know, the alcoholic is going to intuitively pick that person out. So we want everybody prepared. If something happens that somebody absolutely cannot be at the rehearsal, let's say their plane gets snowed in, but they're going to be there for the intervention, then you need to get on the phone with them and go through everything that you've rehearsed, how everything's going to happen, so that they're as prepared as possible when they show up the next day for the intervention.
Because the key to these things is plan, plan, plan. So we want to have all our ducks in a row and have everything rehearsed to the nth degree.
The success is all about the preparation.